Hey there, gang. I'm here today with my friend Nico, and we want to talk about beginning your in-hand work. And one of the, I think, most important parts of the in-hand work is accessing the horse's pole, the occipital pole, or the atlanto-occipital joint, or whatever you want to call it. Basically the junction between the head and the start of their neck. When we're talking about our in-hand work and when we carry this into our ridden work, being able to access that pole is incredibly important because the body tends to be really protective of that joint. And when we talk about bend and flexion, you can have flexion without bend, but you can't have good bend without proper flexion. So when we access the pole, or when we unlock the pole to access the top line, that's going to get us started on that process to make sure that we've got eventually what we would refer to as that throughness in our horse's body. So when we're talking about this joint specifically, we're looking at this lateral flexion from that occipital pole, and the degree of flexibility in that joint itself is really limited. So one of the things that might frustrate some riders when they're working in hand is just how little there is to do and how much waiting there might be for the horse. So for Nico, if I'm going to ask for flexion from the pole laterally, so here with the neck straight, if I were to ask for a little flexion laterally, you'll notice it's there. It's very, very tiny. What we often say is eyelashes left and eyelashes right because of how limited that flexion is in the joint itself. The way that we'll ask this is just by simply nudging or encouraging. I think about it as the nose band of the cavesson, and you could be doing this in a halter as well, and we'll eventually be doing it in the bridle. But we want to think about just hanging that nose band softly to the side and more or less waiting for the horse to release that joint themselves underneath that. If we've got a horse that we ask for this lateral movement from the head and there's a resistance, if you try to push into it, what you'll see is the rest of the neck will do the movement. You see how he'll start to sway from his chest here, and Nico knows how to release that pole pretty easily, so you see how he softens a little and then comes into kind of an extension of the top line. When we talk about accessing the top line, it's going to be first through this releasing of the pole. And there's almost a reflexive response when the horse releases through the pole. They start to telescope through the neck, reaching out from their back. In some cases, we talk about the neck peeling away from the back. Okay? And there's a considerable connection between the horse's hips and their pole, between the sacrum, really, and the pole. So when we get accessibility here to the pole, we get better accessibility to that sacrum, which comes down into the hind legs. So we've got better leg movement if we can unlock the pole in this way. So it's an extremely subtle movement. Again, just hanging the cavesson nose band a little to the left, hanging it a little bit to the right, essentially waiting for our horse to release within that. And so I'll hang here. Nico's a little bit chilling out, wanting to go to sleep, and that's perfect for you to see because, again, the idea is we force this to happen. We want to just encourage that to come through. There, he's a little distracted, and these things will happen with your horses. There. And so it's just a soft nudging, okay? And just like with your wrist, you think of, we're just trying to soften and loosen that in there. If we try to force it, try to push it, it's going to cause the body to resist. And that's the opposite of what we're looking for when it comes to our in-hand work. We're talking about relaxation. We're talking about acceptance. We're talking about just finding that melting into your hand that's going to come from the nose band, or from the unlocking the pole. Now, if your horse is incredibly resistant to this, and some are based on tensions that they have that build up in the pole, if your horse is incredibly resistant, you might start out on the side here rather than directly in front, because for some horses, being directly in front like this can be too much. It feels too bothersome if they're holding a ton of tension there. You may also need to be more off to the side here. So there's other ways that we can do this. I could hold, if this were the halter or the cavesson, I could hold the cheek piece here, and I might have a little contact on the pole. I'll come over on this side so that you can see that. So if I were working with one that was really bothered with their head, I might hold here on the cheek piece. and just stabilize with a light contact here at my hand and just say, hey, can you soften and come this way for me? The more that you do this, the more that your horses will unlock and release and come soft into that connection at the pole, and that's what's going to give you access to the rest of the top line. And again, you'll know when it's happened because they'll soften under the hand and they'll give that soft extension. So I'll come here to the front again for Nico and we'll play, and you can see how he starts to reach out there and the nose will come out. Again, some of our horses, because of restriction in the pole, they'll come down and the nose will be sort of behind the eyeballs, right? Behind the vertical. We want to play that until they can open that pole and reach that nose a little bit more open, thinking about the nose coming out in front of their forehead. So here Nico's focused off on something outside the arena. There, I just play a little left, a little right. And the idea is, if you find a spot of tension, wait and soften. Don't try to push through it, because the body will react with more resistance when you try to add resistance or add force to that tension that you're accessing in the pole. You want to give a lot of time. You want to be really patient with it, and it's about allowing the horse to release this for themselves rather than making it happen. We can suggest it, we can inspire the change for them, but they're the ones that actually have to make the change. So don't be frustrated, give this time, and just continue chipping away at it with your horse. We're going to have Tyler come in with one of her horses now, and we're going to see what we get with releasing the pole and accessing the top line that way. All right, so we've got Tyler here, and pony that Tyler is working with, Gia is her name, and she's been recently working with her, and she started transitioning from groundwork to our in-hand work. So we're going to start out by unlocking the pole and seeing how that allows us to access Gia's body. So from the cavesson, Tyler, you want to come up onto near the ring of the cavesson there? There you go. Yep. Yeah, and so there we incorporate a little bit of kind of the next step of the rein back in that if we need to. And so we just want to think about, can you hang that noseband a little to the left? Yeah, Gia says, oh, I remember that. A little to the left and a little to the right. Now, if she goes down there too far, sometimes that can be a little bit of an evasion. So we want to limit that. Think about kind of there being an invisible floor down there. We say, don't go farther than that necessarily. Good. And so we want to think a little, it would be easy, kind of show a little bit, Tyler, that wave that we wouldn't necessarily want, where somebody's pulling the head left and right, okay? And some of our horses will unlock anyway, in spite of the fact that we're offering it wrong, because maybe we stimulate something in there that helps them find that. But now we want to think just smaller, a little left, a little right, a little left, a little right. There. And we want to think about when we come up into that spot where there's tension or resistance, we want to float just under the surface of that. I think about it a lot of times as though I'm asking not for them to flex at the pole laterally, but more asking them the question of what degree of flexion is available. Okay, so I'm asking, hey Gia, what do you have over here to the left? Okay, great. What do you have over here to the right? Okay, great. How about now back over here to the left? Okay, great. Then maybe their answer is, I've got nothing, there's no flexibility. And that's fine too, depending on the degree of tension that they're holding in the pole, depending on potential arthritic changes or injuries or, you know, whatever might be going on in that joint that maybe we can't even see. Their answer will always be true in that moment, right? And so I want to always be checking in and saying, how about now? How about now? What do you have available? Okay. And it's kind of like when you go to a yoga class and you're in, say you're in downward dog, and your yoga instructor says, think about the back of your shoulder blades, or think about the back of your calves, or something like that. You're just drawing attention to where they may be tension, or maybe they're able to release. And so we see here how Gia had to do a little stepping in order to find this. Some of our horses, when we do this, they'll take quite a few steps, because you'll recall that we talked about the connection from the pole to the sacrum. So sometimes when we get the pole to release, the hind feet have to take a couple steps also, because something releases farther down the chain. So when they're moving around a little bit. So long as they're not just taking over and leaving the arena or something like that. If they're stepping a little, they're deviating a little as a way to rebalance the body, or as a way that they're accessing and working on releasing this tension, I'm just going to try to hang with that. I'm going to try to be there and offer soft support. And again, there's a moment where we see she started to release the pole, and here she needs to do a little bit of moving in her feet. So Tyler can guide the movement and then ask for a halt whenever you're ready there, Tyler. And then within the halt again, we'll say, well, now what do we have here? Yeah. And so there we see kind of the energy changes, and even the changes starting in her eyes, getting a little heavy in the eyelids. So that's a moment where she's starting to kind of go inside, going internal. It's almost as though Tyler's doing a little bit of body work just by releasing the pole, which in a sense, it is what we're doing within the training side of things. I like to think about it always that everything we do with a horse is body work, either to the benefit or to the detriment, right? And so we want to aim that it's always to the benefit. So in this case, yes. In this case, you see there was a bit of a walking around reaction because Tyler pointed out to Gia, hey, here's a spot where you've got some tension. And as she sorted through it, now she's kind of going through that processing side of things. So it's not uncommon when we do this for your horse to go through some stretching or reaching or otherwise releasing. Maybe they're yawning. Maybe that, some horses will even lay down when we do this. That's not uncommon either. There's not really many wrong responses so long as they're still participating with you in this process of releasing that tension in the pole. There, and so here's a moment where she's a little distracted, and that's where we would say she left the arena in that moment. So Tyler just rebalances with her, reorganizes her, and then we'll ask for a halt when you find it, when you find that you can. There we go, and we'll remember stick on for the halt. Yeah, and always playing that hand on the noseband to say, can you release your tension? Can you release your pole? And we'll see when she releases the pole, the neck gets long there. The neck gets long and the back begins to soften. That's a big piece of how this is going to carry over into our ridden work eventually, is that by unlocking the pole, we unlock relaxation through the rest of the top line. So we hope that this has been helpful for you and your horses, and we hope that you're enjoying the journey with your horse.